webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining us a little bit early here. We are right at the hour. I was giving everybody a chance to kind of get in, get settled, and get logged in. I want to do a quick audio check before we go ahead for the next kind of set of things to do before the webinar kicks off. So test 1, 2, 3 on my side. And if we can get a test 1, 2, 3 from Steve, please.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Yep, and if we can get one of our fine folks at Asterix to give us a quick chat that you heard that. Great. Wonderful. Okay, so a couple of things. We're going to get started because we're at 101 here, so we want to jump right in. But before we get started, usually we're looking at about the 35, 45-minute range for our presentations. We will encourage you to ask as many questions as you want as we go through. We don't stop and answer questions as we're going through. That kind of breaks up the flow and makes it a bad experience. But ask the questions using the GoToWebinar panel. And then at the end, we'll try and leave a couple of minutes to field as many questions as we can. And we won't read your name. We won't read your company or anything along those lines. There's also a couple of handouts I want you to take notice of. If on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see polls, questions, handouts. There's 2 of 5. There's 2 brochures there that you can click on, and you can download those brochures to take with you today, which would be great. We encourage you to do so. With that, there'll be a brief pause, and I'll come back on live with the recording started, as we will be recording today's session, and we will get going. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session. My name is Kevin Miller, and I'm going to be your MC for today. Before we get into today's presentation, I did want to go through a brief overview of who Asterix is before I introduce you to our speaker and his company, Labvoice. So real quick, who is Asterix and why are we hosting these webinars? We've been doing quite a few of these webinars, bringing together thought leaders from throughout the laboratory informatics and the R&D space. For over 25 years, our company has brought a unique breadth of highly specialized services, process technology, which has enabled us to be a leading partner in transforming the way science-based businesses succeed. A couple of quick facts about the company: established in '95. We are vendor and platform agnostic. We don't align with any one technology. We work with a great many technologies, and one of those is who's presenting today. Locations in the U.S. and overseas, 1,200 employees total. Key thing for us, 90% of team members hold some form of an advanced science degree. So we are very much a science-based organization, headquartered in Red Bank, New Jersey. Clients we work with, we can do everything from startups to Fortune 1000. We work in the life science enterprise space, also chemical, CPG, government agencies, R&D institutions, typically anybody with a lab. Let me go to the next slide, please. The scope of services that we're bringing cover the full spectrum of scientific and operations and data management. And that means we can help with strategic innovation and roadmaps, enterprise architecture, data management and governance, business analysis, solution selection, pretty much everything from helping you figure out what your technology stack should look like, helping you really kind of map out that stack relative to where you're going as a company, and then help you even choose the right mixture of solutions. From there, we can help implement those solutions and then provide post-implementation tools like systems validation, or even scientific and technical staffing after the fact. So that's a little bit about Asterix, what we do on the services side. So I want to go ahead and introduce the speaker for today. And Steve McCoy is the head of sales at Labvoice. He was previously at a company called Tetra Sciences, and he brings 10 plus years in consulting, customer success, and sales. Steve, I'm going to pass it over to your capable hands. I'm going to sit back and enjoy the presentation with the rest of the attendees, and I'll be back on at the end.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks to everybody else for joining today. So as Kevin set up, I am Steve McCoy. I'm part of the team here at Labvoice. And today the topic is really going to be focusing on how digital assistants can play into lab optimization. But to set the stage a bit, in a recent report by Merck on the state of scientific productivity, 85% of scientists surveyed felt that research was increasingly complex to carry out. And there are a variety of reasons for this. More complex therapies and detection methods, much of what is easily discovered already has been, and more. But without a doubt, one of the biggest contributors to this sentiment is that in spite of the advances made in scientific software and the science itself, research is still bounded to its manual, paper-based origins. And as many of us know, even the most connected, quote unquote connected lab, scientists are still working to capture missing data as they perform their experiments. And it's really, we have found not uncommon to see two people dedicated to a task that ideally is a one-person job. And in that case, what would be really helpful is a personal assistant, somebody who is specifically tasked to work side by side with that person to help record observations, notes, and data, to control instruments and equipment when their partner's hands are full, to read instructions aloud so the users can focus on what's in front of them, and to create an audit trail and enter data into systems of record for their partner. And we do see this in some labs already. So one scenario that comes to mind is two people working on sample accessioning, or automation specialists training a colleague on how to use a work cell. But unfortunately, this human assistant concept doesn't really work out well for the budget holders and lab directors, as it's a very expensive, time-consuming way of addressing some of those challenges. So as a result, the scientist is often left to fend for themselves, working through tedious, boring tasks. And given the advances in lab of the future type technology that we've seen over the past decade, could there be a way to turn that human assistant into a digital assistant? Of course, and that's really why we built Labvoice, which is a laboratory digital assistant. So we as a company look where there is human interaction and lab workflows, and then leveraging technology, including voice, cloud, and Internet of Things, we minimize the rote, error-prone aspects of these processes. So there are three components of the Labvoice platform: a low-code design tool to define your laboratory workflows, a scientific app to run those workflows, enabling guided process execution and hands-free data collection, and a new generation of metrics harvested from those workflows for better insights into lab optimization. We work across various types of science in all sorts of laboratories to improve efficiency and productivity, increase adherence to compliance standards and protocols, train new technicians and employees, and expedite and improve the quality of data that is generated in the lab. Today, for the purposes of our presentation, we will be focusing on the digital assistant, what makes it so useful for personnel in the lab, and then we'll actually explain how Labvoice is used by discussing three case studies. So before diving into the details and benefits of digital assistants, we'd like to point out what we believe at Labvoice to be the core principles of laboratory digital assistants. So first, they should be designed to help with laboratory processes, whether those occur before, during, or after an experiment. Operations, manufacturing, and quality folks should benefit as well. Secondly, digital assistants should be able to help out both with routine, everyday forms of data collection, but also be flexible enough to walk a user through a process end to end, no matter how frequently that process occurs or any deviations that come about. Here's one such example of that, where a digital assistant streamlines a process by providing real-time, on-the-spot instructions based on the user's answer. And lastly, just because you can voice enable anything doesn't mean that you should. It's important that voice lessen the burden on the scientist, not create more work. Perhaps most importantly, these digital assistants should connect and integrate with the tools scientists use on a daily basis. A laboratory digital assistant, in many ways, is a user experience layer. Its focus is to make the lives of scientists and engineers easier. They homogenize the interactions with instruments and software, and they make them accessible to users as they move throughout the lab. Where gaps once existed with data capture and documentation within these systems, lab digital assistants fill that void, transforming the way that people interact with their informatics and their operations infrastructure. So over the next few slides, what we'll do now is look at 3 use cases that are taken from real-life examples of laboratory digital assistants in action. The first example is a sample accessioning workflow, highlighting the work of a CRO based in North Carolina. Essentially, the CRO's research operations team would have to sort incoming samples daily, requiring 2 people to do so. One person would sit with the samples, read the sample ID, and wait for the other person to find the appropriate destination for that sample or that sample rack on a piece of paper. The person handling the samples would then place the samples where it needed to go. And this worked. It's important to note that this did work, but using 2 people to accomplish a job that ideally would only require 1 person was not adequate, especially at a CRO, and especially when we first started working with them during COVID times. So they replaced the person reading the piece of paper with the digital assistant. So here's a video example, and before getting into this video, it's important to note that the user is looking up the locations of the samples, but the digital assistant could also instruct the user to place the scanned samples in these locations as well. Let's watch.
Welcome to Labvoice.
Hey, Labvoice. Sample search.
Would you like individual or fast scanning?
Fast.
Scan the samples. Barcode already scanned. Please try again.
Done.
Please wait while I get the sample locations. Sample 1 is located in fridge 1, shelf 1. Read the next sample.
Yes.
Sample 5 is located in fridge 1, shelf 2. Next sample.
Yes.
Sample 8 is located in fridge 2, shelf 2. Next.
Yes.
Sample 9 is located in fridge 4, shelf 2. Next.
Yes.
Scan more samples.
No.
To see more, visit us at labvoice.ai.
So now, as you can see, the person picks up the sample or the sample rack, uses an integrated barcode scanner to capture the ID, and then the digital assistant instructs them where to place it. So not only does this free up somebody to focus on their other tasks, but it actually eliminated human-related mistakes, such as misreading the wrong location from the work. So this case study actually looks at a bit more complex workflow, and complex in that there are several instrument and software integrations involved. So a process development team at a large pharma company had a time-consuming sample prep weighing process. At their office desk, the scientists would fill in the materials and expected weights in their ELN interface and then proceed into the lab. Once in the laboratory, gowned and gloved up, they would then go collect the reagents, having to visually confirm that they grabbed the right reagent. They then bring the reagents to a fume hood where they get to work weigh. Typically, our customer would have to use paper or even memorize the expected weight, container ID, number, and the actual weight for each reagent. So really, if they're doing this right, they're limited to one to two samples at a time. And if they grab the wrong reagent, they have no way of knowing or confirming this until they're back at their desks, checking what they have put into the ELN. If the scientist has more reagents to weigh, they do have to remain in the lab rather than going back. It takes too much time to deglove and undown, as you can imagine. And so they remotely connect into their ELN sometimes from a shared laptop in the lab. which is on the other side of the room, and oftentimes somebody is using that computer. So they manually enter this information, they perform a quick visual error check, then they return to the reagent rack and start the process over again, often 5 to 6 times in a single setting. So here's what the process looks like once we introduce a digital assistant into the mix.
In the lab, the chemist creates a new experiment and adds a description. They sketch or paste the planned reaction. And define the desired quantity of the limiting reagent. In this example, once the experiment is set up, it is transferred to a colleague with a request for weighing. Later,
In Labvoice. Continue my experiment.
you have a few open experiments. The most recent one is 139045. Do you want to continue it?
Yes.
What would you like to do?
Weigh reagents.
Hang on while I get the reagent list. Scan your first reagent. You need to weigh up 100 milligrams of benzohydrazide. How much do you weigh?
100.5 milligrams.
Scan the next reagent. You need to weigh out 77.943 milligrams of benzaldehyde. How much did you weigh?
78 milligrams.
You're done weighing all the reagents. Updated your experiment. Later. In the
So now, because they're working hands-free, the scientists can gather as many samples as a rack can hold and then walk over to the fume hood. The digital assistant is integrated with a nearby barcode scanner and balance, so all the scientist has to do is scan and then weigh the sample. On top of that, the assistant can use custom logic to determine if that sample was already scanned and weighed, as we saw in the previous video, or not part of the scientist's original order. Once the reagent is weighed, the digital assistant packages all of this information, plus the actual weight, and then stores it in the ELN automatically. So now they leave the lab in a fraction of the time they had previously spent performing the same workflow, confident that the reagents that were weighed were the right ones, and confident that the measurements captured were the true mass of each sample. Our last use case illustrates how Labvoice digital assistants enable animal researchers to access their ELN, or study management tool. In this case, it's IDBS, as they're performing a dosing protocol. So previously, while one person handled the subject, they had a colleague stand nearby, manually entering the weight, time, and other data points into IDBS. So again, this is a process that worked, but it was resource intensive and provided the opportunity for a good amount of human error. So for example, what if the scientist missed the key and entered 135 instead of 1235? It most likely would go unnoticed, and it actually could impact the results of the study, especially one that was time-oriented like this. So for our final video, we'll take a look at what happens when a digital assistant is introduced.
Welcome to Labvoice.
Hey, Labvoice. Those animal.
What's the animal ID?
A273.
What's the weight?
250 grams.
Dose the animal with 0.125 milliliters of compound A. Say continue when done.
Continue.
Any observation?
Healthy.
What's the next animal ID?
A121.
What's the next animal ID?
I'm done.
Great job, Toby. All your inputs have been saved to the ELN.
So the immediate benefit here from the digital assistant is that the human keyboard is no longer needed. That person can go focus on higher value activities or double the output of that particular process. And as a result, human error is reduced drastically through automated data capture. The time and the researcher, as we saw, are automatically recognized and entered by Labvoice. And should a data point seem out of range, Labvoice can confirm if the user actually meant what they said. Finally, this does improve safety and compliance as the scientists can freely focus on the work in front of them. Building on these case studies, what we've seen is that users begin to incorporate more use cases and optimize existing processes. As a user realizes the potential of a digital assistant, they can imagine more places where their processes can be optimized by the presence of a digital assistant. For example, an animal science team may start with just one workflow, like dosing records as we saw, but then build on that by incorporating tumor measurements or bird checks or necropsies. And then building upon that success, the organization looks at use cases beyond the realm of in vivo work, such as sample management, lab operations, automation, platform integrations. And over time, we end up seeing a pretty profound transformation in the end user laboratory experience for data entry, increased efficiency, and better compliance. But it's not just end users who benefit. And this is something that I'll expound upon with a little bit about our vision of the platform. So as more lab flows are created, there are more data points that are generated. And as more data is generated, more insights can be surfaced. So with reporting and metrics, users can layer these AI models on top of the data, and they can begin to create substantial gains in process performance, lab optimization, and so on. And you can start with simple aspects of a process, like metadata collection, who, what, when, what SOP was run, and then help support those users with tips and suggestions throughout the process execution stage. The next logical step would then be to notify management on suggested changes to handle process issues, such as predicting batch failure, equipment headaches, or when consumables might be running low. And one day, we can see a world in which this can be used to help predict what compounds should be used in drug discovery. In summary, we see the benefits of digital assistants manifest in several ways. In the short term, processes are optimized. And unlike SOPs, which need to account for every possible deviation, digital assistants can streamline workflows by responding to the specific scenario given by the user. Undocumented processes are standardized without placing burden on the operator, and organizations to save time, improve compliance, and increase data integrity. Speaking of data integrity, because real-time bench-side data capture has been now enabled, end-of-day data reentry activities and temporary records are eliminated, producing clean, high-quality data. Long-term, higher quality data means that scientists looking for information in the future will have an easier time finding the data sets that they're looking for. And as discussed in the last slide, this also impacts data science and AI projects. In fact, one of VP of data science that we work with suggested that these digital assistants were the foundational aspect to his ML projects, as he saw it as a means of increasing user engagement with the informatics system upon which his team, would then draw the information from. With optimization of processes, that means there will be less resources wasted on project, whether that's reagents and consumables, project rework, or even just the scientist time. But perhaps most importantly, all of these measurable outcomes often lead to an immeasurable improvement in the lab experience for the researcher. So pause in just a minute to collect your questions. And if we don't address yours, feel free to reach out to us by the info@labvoice.ai email address, or visiting our website where we have a chat function. We would appreciate a follow on LinkedIn if you haven't done that already. And if you're interested in a tailored demo of the platform, you can reach out to me. That's something that we do for free. So thank you all for the time today, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Great, thank you so much. Great presentation, some really compelling technology at work there, Steve. Much appreciated. So, and I like the way that you did it with kind of the real world interaction between a device. So that was really cool. That audio worked out so well. So thank you for that. I do want to jump into some questions that are on the floor. Again, if you joined a couple minutes late, I want to mention that you can answer questions, type them into the question function on GoToWebinar. We won't read your name and we won't read your company. We'll just read your question. And we'll kind of work our way through them. So bear with me here 1 second. A couple of things I need to do. Stop